First, Donald Trump cannot simply walk away. That's not viable at this stage. Number two, he does not have the means to gain control of the situation. The strategic initiative, unfortunately for him, now lies with his opponent in Tehran. Three, there isn't much evidence that if he goes back and attacks Iran as he did before, perhaps even more violently, that the outcome will be any different. There is just no evidence that this regime feels compelled to surrender to him. And then finally, there is no amount of pain that he can inflict that's going to change that outcome. In fact, I think the pain that he's going to inflict is not so much on Iran, but on the rest of the world. We're looking at not just supply chain disruption. In some cases, we're looking at supply chain destruction. We knew after the first sort of 3 weeks of incessant bombing and missile strikes that it would take at least 2, maybe 3 years for the Gulf to recover if it stopped. But it was also clear after that first 3-week experience that if he came back and did it again, particularly if it was even more intense, it would probably be a decade or more before the region would recover from this disaster. Now, again, what happens at home in the United States is really decisive. Inflation is rising. Depending upon who you talk to, we could be looking over the next few years at inflation at 10, 12, 15%. I mean, that's how dangerous this is right now. In addition to that, if you set aside the sovereign national debt and pretend that doesn't exist, I suppose you can argue things don't look that bad. But unfortunately, we're going into territory we haven't seen since the 1970s. But we forget that in the 1970s, the debt to GDP ratio was less than 35%. Today, it's over 125% and rising rapidly. At the same time, bond markets around the world are being destroyed. I mean, all the bond markets are rising. The yields are rising. And that's the critical part of this. And Americans in particular know from their experience, you hit the 5% mark on the 10-year yield. That's very dangerous. Then you're looking at this enormous debt payment that you probably can't service. So those things have to be juxtaposed with the military problem and the strategic problem and the global problem. And the smart thing for Donald Trump to do, however humiliating it might be, is to get out, is to tell everyone on humanitarian grounds, I feel compelled to suspend military operations. It's doing too much damage to the world. We will have to look for other ways to resolve the dispute with Iran. That would be the best possible thing that he could do. And here's another part of this that most people overseas don't understand. If he did that now, no one in the United States would care. The only way to get people's attention in the United States is for you to charge $10 a gallon at the pump, and then you've got to kill 500 or 1,000 of us in a day. So why even run that risk if you're president of the United States? Why not get out? Why not do what I described? Well, he can't. I think something very concrete came out of this because Xi Jinping took the time to stand up and make it abundantly clear that China is a rising power and that the United States is a declining power. We understand your problem. For you to receive any help from us, you're going to have to fundamentally change both domestic policy and foreign policy. That's effectively what he said in a message. Well, he's not going to help us with Iran because both Russia and China determined a long time ago that if Iran is defeated successfully by us, they're probably next on the menu. So there's absolutely no incentive on their part whatsoever to abandon Iran. I think Xi in particular is very happy that Iran has done as well as it has, because it signals clearly that Taiwan is off the table. And effectively, that was the other outcome. There's an old expression, a ship's a fool to fight a fort. China is the largest fortress in the world, and trying to fight it from the sea is absurd. So I think the best thing that happened at this summit was the recognition that there is no point in organizing, training, equipping, spending, and planning to attack China. That's a very dumb idea. On the other hand, there's no willingness in the United States to cut spending. There's no willingness to alter the path that we are on right now. And that's the problem for the Chinese. If you go to the Chinese and say, well, we want to cooperate with you, we've changed our minds, well, we'd like to stay the reserve currency after all, and we need your cooperation. We have a debt problem, as you well know. We would like to cooperate on that. To do that, you have to change the way you do business in the United States. There's no evidence that we're willing to do that. And as for these alleged deals that were supposedly made, I can't confirm any of them. I don't know what we extracted from it in terms of benefit, but from the Chinese standpoint, they saw us off as the loser. They were polite about it. And of course, to add insult to injury, Vladimir Putin flies in a couple of days later, and it makes sense. People say, well, this is wrong. Why the Chinese and Russians, they don't trust each other. Look, this has nothing to do with trust. It has everything to do with need and necessity. There's a symbiotic relationship there between Russia and China. Russia has all the resources, minerals, oil, gas that you can imagine available for Chinese use. China has the largest manufacturing base in the world. The Russians need that manufacturing base to keep up with the West, to keep up with the rest of the world. And China needs Russia in Central Asia. Russia and China both have an interest in keeping Central Asia stable, prosperous, and peaceful. Because a few years ago, there was this individual, his name was Genghis Khan, and he tended to break the furniture and ruin everything between Russia and China. They don't want to go through that. But the Chinese are much less popular in Central Asia than the Russians. The leaders in Central Asia look at Vladimir Putin as almost an insurance policy against bad things happening in their country. China is not a natural military power. It can build military power because it's rich and profitable. But it is not by nature a martial power. It has no need of more territory. So China is very different from what we in the West imagine. We keep trying to transform China into some sort of imperial Japanese state. It's not. I think what we're seeing is that the United States increasingly is going to have to defend itself. And that means it's going to have to focus in the Western Hemisphere, and it's going to have to look at what happens here in North America. And what I was trying to say at the beginning is the Chinese are not fools. They see all the problems that we were talking about at the beginning inside American society. The lack of cohesion, the potential for unrest, the supply chain problems that we've got now. All of those things are the proverbial chickens coming home to roost. The Chinese know that. We are going to have to turn away from these things overseas. When things get unraveled here in the United States, when we have unrest in our cities, when people can't buy the things that they need, when gasoline is $10 a gallon. We just go down the list of all the things that could happen. Nobody gives a damn what happens in Central Africa or anywhere else in Africa. This is something people in Washington don't understand. They really think that things around the rest of the world matter, not to us. 64% of people polled are opposed to the war in the Gulf. Well, if we go back to 1914, higher numbers than that were opposed to involving ourselves in the war in Europe. In 1914, 1917, the same thing was true in 1938, 39, 40, 41, 42. If the Japanese had not attacked us, there was no support for intervening in Europe. Americans are focused on what happens here, period. And these politicians don't get it, but they're going to get an education when things fall apart economically here. $200 a barrel before the end of the year, and the world is not going to punish or penalize Iran for that. They're going to look at us because it was announced that 26 ships, these are tankers, left the Persian Gulf, flowed right through and out into the open ocean. They paid the toll, they were escorted, they got out safely. We're going to see more of that, and Iran is managing it. That makes us very unhappy. We don't want to sign an agreement that would give them control over that. But I remind everybody that after World War I, that's exactly what the British did with the Turks. The Turks control the Dardanelles, not the British, not the French. There was a convention, everybody met, the rules were established, and it was acknowledged that Turkey, since it controls most of the terrain around the Dardanelles, should run the Dardanelles, manage it. They have, and it's worked very, very well. I predict the same thing will happen with Iran. There'll be a meeting, all the nations of the world will get together, and then Iran will be responsible for ensuring that the commerce flows. That's where we're headed. The sooner America realizes this and walks away, and I'm talking about Donald Trump, not America so much, the better off we'll all be. But I don't think that's going to happen without another round of stupid warfare. Without Germany, the EU is completely meaningless economically and financially. And I think the EU is going to go the way of the buffalo along with NATO. And when you get a new government in Berlin, I'm fairly confident that new government will do two things. Number one, it's going to argue for an end to support to the regime in Kiev. They figured out that 50+% of everything that's ever gone into Kiev has been stolen. Things have been resold on the black market, and the bank accounts in places like Albania and Cyprus have filled up with ill-gotten gains. And so the criminal elements like Zelensky and his friends, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. They've just stolen money on a scale that I don't think anybody's ever seen in history. So the Germans have decided that's number one. Number two, they want to buy energy from Russia. And that means that they're going to leave NATO. They've already signaled that they would like American forces to get out of Germany. So the point is, yes, Germany is a wonderful country. We did many good things while we were there, but we should have gotten out a long time ago. Germany has to become a sovereign state. We don't seem to understand these things. We've got the same problem in South Korea. If we don't get out of the peninsula, South Korea is not a sovereign state and is not recognized as one. It's seen as a sort of military colony of the United States. And that's really what Germany has been turned into. So I think we're going to see tremendous change in these two places. So the war in Ukraine is going to end. There will be no great war between Europe and Russia. And I don't think, as much as the Russians would like to, that they will launch against the various factories that have been producing components for these long-range drones and missiles. That's something they can do. They know where they're produced. But Putin has been very methodical, very deliberate, and very patient. Three things that historically Russians are not. And he's got the forces to do it. He is not missing anything. We have actually created the Russian military that we said we had to fight to defeat. I mean, stop and think about that. Russia back in 2022 was nothing. They built a force that was designed to defend its borders, and that was it. Now they have a force that if they wanted to unleash it in offensive operations, could probably roll right through Poland into Germany. And that's something that, hotheads in Moscow mentioned from time to time would like to do, but that's a dumb idea. Putin wants to do business with the Germans and with the Europeans. He doesn't want to go to war with anybody. All of that's nonsense. But this is the sort of thing we hear in the United States all the time, and that's what's gotten us into trouble in Iran. No one understands what Iran really is, and nobody accepts the fact or even understands, really, that 47 years have changed Iran. Iran is not what it was 47 years ago. Thank God.